Hey, welcome back to Crime Time 911. This case was the first case where I went down the deepest rabbit hole I have ever been down since starting my podcast. There were so many details to this case, it was difficult to know what to include and what I had to leave out. I highly recommend you research this case on your own if you're interested in all the details. You'll be invested for hours. This is the case of four innocent girls who wanted to live a happy life and break free from their controlling and violent family. This case shocked a nation. The Shafia honor unalivings. Mohammed Shafia, who was 25, and Rona Amir, who was 18, got married in 1978. Rona was the oldest daughter of a retired Army colonel and a Kabul businessman. They were the picture-perfect couple. The young couple's marriage was arranged by Shafia's mother, Shirin, 2 years prior. Shirin saw Rona at a distant relative's wedding. Rona was only 16 at the time that Shirin first met her. She was quiet and reserved, had beautiful skin and a round face with delicate features. Not only that, but she came from a reputable middle-class family. Shirin immediately thought how Rona would make a good wife for her son Shafia, as well as a great mother for his children. Shirin followed the strict tradition that dictated the rules of betrothal. She would first ask Rona's family for her hand in marriage for her son. Then she would visit Rona and her family many times. Rona and her family were also invited to Shirin's home as per their custom requirements. These visits would allow Shafia to see the girl his mother had elected to be his wife. He approved of Rona. Because Rona was so young, she didn't fully comprehend the concept of getting married and what it would mean to become a wife. But she knew it was her fate to be given away to a man who would essentially be a stranger to her, as well as someone she did not love. Rona would tell her older brother to, quote, "Give me away in marriage if he is a good man, don't if he is not." As a result, Rona's family would investigate Shafia. What they learned was interesting. They found that his father had passed in a car accident when he was only 2 years old, and that he had only completed grade 6 due to the absence of a patriarch in Shafia's family. As well as out of economic necessity, he was thrown into a role of leadership and responsibility at a very young age. Shafia learned to repair TVs and radios through being an apprentice with his extended family. When Shafia was a teen, he opened his own small electronics shop using a loan he received from his grandfather. Eventually, he would open an even bigger shop in downtown Kabul, expanding his services from not only selling radios but also reselling other electronics he imported. Rona's family decided he was an acceptable suitor because he was a simple, hard-working young man who had a successful business. With the blessing of her family, Rona, who was only in grade 11 at the time, would be engaged to a man who was 7 years older than her and a complete stranger. I know it seems strange that such a young lady would be married off to a man 7 years older. However, we have to keep in mind that in some countries it is acceptable. In fact, in Afghanistan, sometimes girls as young as 2 years old were offered to men as old as 60 or 70 by their families. To be clear, I 100% do not think these arrangements are okay, especially giving away a baby to a man in their 60s for marriage. I sincerely wish that the laws in these countries would be updated so that the women would be more respected and babies and children would not be given away for inappropriate reasons. Their wedding was held at the finest hotel in Kabul, and lots of people attended. Rona's dress was a beautiful baby blue, and there were 2 blue roses that were made out of fabric that sat in her gorgeous, dark, silky hair near her left ear. The venue had magnificent chandeliers and carpets in rich red tones. It was a dream wedding that any Afghan woman would want. In December 1979, when the Soviet troops had invaded Afghanistan, Rona and Shafia were facing their own problems. Rona was unable to get pregnant. Shafia was not initially upset about Rona not being able to give him children, as he was too busy expanding his business. Rona would see several doctors and went through many procedures, but still was not able to conceive. Shafia even took Rona to India for treatments from experts without success. After many years of not having children, Shafia's acquaintances and business associates would start to ridicule him for his failure to get Rona pregnant. They started to think something was wrong with him. Instead of expressing his frustrations on the people who were teasing him, Shafia took out his anger on poor Rona. He would become more controlling, even going as far as not to allow her to visit her own mother. Once when Rona's sister was visiting overnight, Shafia would start yelling at Rona because she could not give him children. Rona's sister, Huma, would stick up for her sister, telling Shafia that it was from God, meaning that the reason Rona could not have children was because of God's will, not anything that Rona could control. When Rona told Shafia not to berate her in front of her sister, Shafia began to physically attack Rona. Huma would never spend the night at Rona's home again. Out of frustration due to her husband's resentment of her, Rona came to a decision that she felt was necessary. She would tell Shafia to take a second wife. In Afghanistan, it is legal to marry multiple women. However, there are conditions that exist that require the equal treatment of all wives, although these conditions are not always observed. Many Afghan women would rather have their husbands take 2 or 3 wives than to face the social stigma of divorce. Shafia did not have to look for a second wife. When the wife of a longtime friend had visited the couple, she suggested her younger sister Tuba, who was 17 at the time, would make a good bride and mother. Tuba would later recall that she was not in love with Shafia at first, but would fall in love with him after they were married. Shafia and Tuba would be married in 1988, 10 years after Rona married the same man. Many of the wedding pictures featured Shafia with his new bride and his existing wife on each arm. Not long after they were married, Tuba became pregnant with their first baby, Zainab, who was born in September 1989. Shafia was happy to be holding the baby he so badly wanted. Rona's role was that of a surrogate mother. She helped Tuba care for the new baby girl, as well as completing chores around the house. She was still praying for a child of her own. Early on in their 3-way relationship, Rona realized that Tuba was scheming to gradually separate her from their shared spouse. Rona would gradually become more and more unhappy. However, in October 1991, Sahar would arrive. Tuba had decided to give this baby girl to Rona to raise as her own. This brought on a rare moment of joy for Rona. But the moment to happiness wouldn't last long when Tuba had announced that Shafi, which is what the sister wives would call their husband, would stay 3 nights with her and only 1 night with Rona. Eventually, Shafia would stop sleeping with his first wife altogether. I couldn't even imagine what Rona had been feeling in this situation. She's already gone through the abuse at the hands of her husband because she was not able to provide him a child, but now she's got to deal with the second wife's abuse as well. I am sure that at this time, she may have been thinking that the stigma of divorce might have been the better consequence than enduring all the abuse. I know that's how I'd feel if I was in that situation. While Sahar was still a baby, the family of 6 would flee to the Pakistani border as the Afghan civil war had entered into the capital city. At this time, Tuba was pregnant with their 4th child and 3rd daughter. While the family was living in Pakistan, a second son would be born into the family. The names of the 4th and 5th children are protected by a publication ban. After their 6th child was born, another daughter, the family packed up and moved to the United Arab Emirates. Shafia would launch a new company called M. Shafi Trading, and business flourished. The family had only been living in Dubai for a little under a year when Panasonic would award Shafia $50,000 for being the top seller in the region. Shafia's children got their first taste of Western culture while living in Dubai. They attended a private American school where they would wear uniforms and learn to speak English. Rona was feeling more and more excluded from the family. Tuba had learned to drive, purchased plenty of gold jewelry, and did everything she had to in order to put herself in a position as the preferred wife. After spending over a decade in Dubai, the Shafia family would try to immigrate to countries such as New Zealand and Australia. However, in 2007, Shafia found their way out of Dubai through Quebec's Immigrant Investor Program. This program provides visas to affluent foreigners in exchange for a hefty check made out to the province, among other things. In 2007, the required amount was $400,000, but today it has increased to a whopping $1.2 million. I was honestly shocked when I learned about the Quebec Immigrant Investor Program. I didn't research this program, however, my first impression is that people can pay the province to get a permanent residency in Canada. Using this story, for example, did they actually check into who Shafia was before they accepted his money to live in Canada? Or do they just allow anyone who is able to pay the fees come over, regardless of what criminal activities they may bring with them? Now, don't get me wrong, I am not against people immigrating into Canada, but I do believe that they have to, go through the proper channels and have proper background checks made and all that kind of stuff to, try to at least minimize criminals coming into the country. We've got enough of our own criminals. We don't need other people's criminals as well. Although the $400K was no issue, Shafia had to come up with a plan on how to get both his wives to Canada, as marrying more than one woman is illegal in Canada. As a result, he would list only one of his wives on the paperwork, Tuba. In June 2007, Rona was sent to Europe to live with relatives while the rest of the family hopped on a plane to Canada, until Shafia came up with a plan to bring Rona over with the family. Even though Rona was not happy in her family, she missed them terribly. 5 months after the family had arrived in Canada, Shafia would sponsor Rona's immigration into the country, telling the authorities that she was his cousin and that she would work as a cook and a housekeeper. The family lived in a rental home for 2 years while they waited for their $900,000 mansion to be built. This new home would have plenty of space for all 10 members of the Shafia family. By then, they had 7 children. What happened in the home between June 2007 and June 2009 is up for debate. However, through the mouths of many, the brick home was a virtual prison. Despite Shafia moving his daughters to one of the freest countries and gave them endless amounts of money to eat fast food and buy expensive clothing, he expected them to uphold his twisted sense of honor. Something as silly as one of the girls talking to a strange boy was enough to destroy the family's reputation in Shafia's eyes. Even though Zainab was the oldest sibling, she knew that she could not make her younger brother, Hamid, angry. The siblings had been attending the same school in Montreal in February 2008 when a Pakistani classmate, Amar Wahid, had sent Zainab a Valentine. Through email, Zainab would warn Amar about her brother, telling him, "If my bro is around, act like complete stranger. We'll talk if my bro is not around, because I don't want to give him the slightest idea that we are friends." Amar stuck to the plan, but it didn't last long. Not even a month after the email, while both of Zainab's parents were in Dubai, she invited her new boyfriend over to the family home. She was unaware that her brother Hamid was also on his way home. Hamid would find Amar hiding in the garage and asked him to leave. Zainab, who was 18 years old at the time, never returned to school, and for the next 10 months she was confined to her room. She wasn't allowed to leave the house without one of her relatives being with her. Sahar was also living a nightmare of her own. At only 16, she had still been adjusting to her new life in Canada when Tuba accused her of kissing a boy. Tuba went as far as to storm into Sahar's school, cornering one of the girl's teachers. Sahar's younger sister acted as their mother's translator. The teacher stated that Tuba was not happy and that she did not accept her daughter kissing a boy as it was not within the parameters of her values. Sahar was depressed and eventually tried to self-harm. She would open one of those white silica gel packets, the kind that you get in a shoebox or in a bag, and mix it with water. Rona and the youngest child, Geeti, were extremely upset. They rushed to Sahar after she drank it. However, Tuba made no attempt to go to her daughter's side, stating, quote, "She can go to hell, let her unalive herself." That night, Sahar would survive the attempt at ending it all. I couldn't even imagine watching one of my children attempt to take their own life and then just blow it off like, oh, well, she's not following the values or the rules that we want. So, to hell with her. Like who are these people? Like, seriously. On May 7, 2007, Sahar would visit her vice principal's office, tears streaming down her face, and spilled everything. How Hamid had flung a pair of scissors at her hand, her self-unaliving attempt, pressures to wear the hijab, her younger sister, the spy, even how her mother had barely talked to her in a month and had also ordered the other children to to ignore her as well. The school would call BATSHA, Quebec's Anglophone Child Welfare Agency. Evelyn Benayoun, a veteran social worker, had classified the call as a Code 1 and immediately dispatched a colleague. However, when Jean Rowe arrived at the high school, she was met by a completely different Sahar. Even though she was still crying, she denied everything. Janine would recall that Sahar would tell her that she didn't want her to meet her parents and that she wanted to go home. Sahar was extremely afraid of her parents knowing about the report, but did not explain why. However, Janine had a protocol to follow and called the house. Tuba went to the school with Zainab in tow. She denied everything, including the self-harming attempt. With Zainab being under her own house arrest, agreed with her mother, would confirm that Sahar was sad about having to wear the hijab. Not long after Tuba and Zainab had arrived, Shafia and Hamid would walk in. Shafia was angry and wanted to know who made the report. Jean would advise him that she could not reveal the source of the report. 2 days later, Jean would return to the school for a follow-up visit. She saw that Sahar was wearing a hijab. This time there was no tears. However, Sahar was still very cautious and minimized the situation. As a result, Jean determined that the child was not at risk at that time and closed the case. I can't even imagine what these poor children had felt. Sahar had a moment where she tried to get herself out, but clearly once the wrath of her parents had sunk in, she was likely terrified beyond anything I can imagine. It also really sucks that the caseworker closed the report as she didn't find that Sahar was at risk at that time. The rules that social workers have to follow are really unfair sometimes. Rona was also growing increasingly unhappy and started to wish that she would be in an accident to end her life. She confided in relatives overseas by making phone calls on payphones. Rona wanted a divorce, but did not want to leave the kids. Shafia ignored her, as well as committed DV acts on her. A few months after Zainab's 19th birthday, she was allowed to return to school. However, not the same school she had attended with Amar. When she had a rare moment alone, she would email her boyfriend telling him how much she missed him. By the beginning of 2009, Zainab and Amar were secretly seeing each other again. Sometimes they would meet at McDonald's, and other times at the library. There were even times when they would hang out with Sahar and her new boyfriend. Zainab, always defiant, introduced her sister to Ricardo Sanchez, who had enrolled in her French class. Ricardo was 21 at the time, 4 years older than Sahar, but Zainab wanted them to meet. At first, the new couple could barely communicate. Ricardo spoke only Spanish, and Zahar only spoke English. And for the first little while they dated, Ricardo thought her name was Natasha. Despite their language barriers, Sahar and Ricardo would start spending every possible moment with each other. They even talked about getting married. Ricardo lived with his aunt, Irma Medina, when he first arrived in Canada. Sahar would tell Irma on multiple occasions that her parents did not know about her relationship with Ricardo, and if they found out, she would be an unalived woman. The youngest sister, Geeti, who was 13, knew about Ricardo as she and Sahar were very close. Soon Geeti ventured down her own path of rebellion. She had never lived in Afghanistan and had only known the privileged life at the Dubai private school and now Canada. Geeti had zero interest in her father's traditions and didn't care if he knew it. She had an interest in makeup, fashionable clothing, and would hide out in the bathroom on days she didn't skip school. Geeti would be the focal point of her father's most violent outbursts. One time in April 2009, Geeti and her 2 siblings, whose names are protected, got home late from the mall. Both Shafia and Hamid would scream and physically hit all 3 children that night. Despite the 2 siblings downplaying the situation, Geeti did not. Zainab had witnessed the whole horrific situation unfold. The situation became unbearable for her, and she made the brave decision to escape. This upset her entire family. Hamid called 911, telling the operator that his almost 20-year-old sister had run away. She left a note stating that she wanted to live her own life. Zainab fled to a woman's shelter. To Shafia, this was the ultimate betrayal. His adult daughter was out in the world completely unsupervised. She could be out engaging in intimate acts, and even if she wasn't, people would think that she was, and that was just as bad. When Sahar, Geeti, and the other two unnamed children got word that Zainab had run away, they were so terrified of what their father would do that they would go to a stranger's house and ask them to call the police. Anne-Marie Choquette was one of the constables that had responded. She and her partner found the 4 children standing on the corner of the street, too afraid to go home. The officers took the kids the rest of the way home and would interview each of the children alone outside the house. Geeti would tell the officers about what had happened to them when they arrived home late from the mall a few weeks before. The unnamed sister would not tell the officers about an injury by her right eye, but the unnamed brother told them how Hamid had kicked him and that his dad threatened to tear them apart. Sahar told the officers of the abuse she endured at the hands of her older brother, as well as the abuse Shafia had done to Zainab because of her boyfriend. Geeti and Sahar told the officers that they were afraid of their father and that they wanted to leave home because of all the violence. The officers were still outside with the children when Shafia had arrived home. One look from their father and the children immediately stopped talking. A social worker from DPJ, Quebec's Francophone welfare agency, was dispatched to the home. The worker interviewed Shafia, Tuba, and Hamid, but decided it was safe to leave the kids in the care of their parents and continue this investigation after the weekend. Although Officer Choquette felt that there was more than enough evidence to lay criminal charges, she ultimately left that decision to DPJ, which is standard protocol. I'm sorry, but the police felt that there was more than enough evidence to lay criminal charges, but yet they didn't express this to the social worker. I would strongly encourage the worker to lay charges and tell them about what the children revealed before their father got home. Too many times the system has failed innocent children. Eventually, DPJ would close the file for unknown reasons. The warning signs were literally everywhere. Geeti didn't go to school for more than a week, even though Sahar did go to school, but she was often in tears. She would tell her teachers and classmates that Geeti was in a coma. While Zainab was still taking refuge in the women's shelter, Rona would overhear a conversation that terrified her to the core. A plan so terrifying that she shared it with her sister in France. Shafia would tell Hamid and Tuba that he would go to Afghanistan to prepare documents, sell his property, and unalive Zainab. When he was asked about the other one, he confirmed that he would unalive the other one too. Rona was convinced that she was the other one. Her sister tried to reassure Rona that she was in Canada, not Dubai or Afghanistan, and that nothing would happen. Eventually, Zainab would contact her mother. Tuba would convince Zainab to return home, promising that if she truly did love Amar, they could get married. Zainab returned home on May 1st, 2009, while her father was in Dubai for a business trip. These people are amazing manipulators. As with most psychopaths and narcissists, they were able to convince anyone what they wanted them to believe, including their own child, who knew the cold hard truth about who they truly were. This is the only reason I can think of why Zainab would return to an incredibly dangerous environment. As the wedding day approached, Tuba would do everything she could to get her daughter to back out. She would even have her brother speak with Zainab. During these conversations, Zainab revealed that she knew it was not her time to get married, but she was being forced to marry to get out of the home. Javid, Tuba's brother, wanted to go to Montreal to meet Amar to ensure that he was good for his niece, so he called Shafia to make sure that he would accept the visit out of respect. This is when Shafia told Javid about his plans to unalive his daughter. Javid would swear at Shafia before hanging up and immediately contacting his sister Tuba to tell her about her husband's plans. It is unknown as to why Javid did not also warn Zainab. Despite her family's efforts, Zainab would marry Amar on May 18th. Within 24 hours, the young couple would be divorced. Zainab told Amar that she could not ruin her family's reputation. Meanwhile, a few days later, Sahar was in a restaurant with Ricardo. They were hugging when her unnamed younger brother walked in. Despite the efforts to hide their relationship, her secret would be exposed. Sahar had taken multiple pictures of her and Ricardo, and later, prints of these pictures would be found inside Hamid's suitcase that he had taken to Dubai on June 1st to see his father. When Shafia and Hamid returned home on June 13, 2009, Shafia kissed Zainab on the head and forgave her for everything. It's thought that he wanted to ensure that his daughter felt comfortable and would assume everything was fine, when in fact, they were not. On June 19th, Hamid would cancel Zainab's cell phone. The next day, his cell phone traveled to and from rural Grand Rimouski, Quebec, which is almost 300 kilometers from their Montreal neighborhood. In the days and weeks leading up to this date, there were several Google searches made in Dubai as well as at home in Canada. June 3rd, there was a Google search on Hamid's laptop. Can a prisoner have control over their real estate? Another search conducted in Dubai was for Canada mountains with lake in Quebec. Back in Canada, the searches intensified. Mountains on water in Quebec, to rent a boat in Montreal. Facts documentaries on unalives, although they searched the M word instead. After Hamid had arrived home on June 19th, he searched where to commit an unaliving. On June 22, 2009, Shafia purchased a 2004 Nissan Sentra, black with gray interior. The next day, he packed the trunk full of luggage for summer vacation. As far as the children were concerned, they were going on a road trip to Vancouver or Niagara Falls or somewhere else. The destination was never clearly revealed. This was because the vacation was all part of the plan. On their way out of town, they would run into Tuba's uncle. He would note that Tuba looked very scared, which was out of character for her. When Javed heard about the vacation, he immediately started thinking about the phone call he had made with his brother-in-law. He felt like something was going to happen. The family would leave Montreal on June 23rd after 3 p.m. They took two vehicles, the Nissan that was just purchased and the Lexus. They would go straight to the place that Hamid had traveled to just days before, Grand Rimouski. Sahar took a picture of Giti holding one of the family's dogs. Their plans had suddenly changed after the family had spent the night at a motel. Instead of continuing on the path to Grand Rimouski, they headed south toward Ottawa on June 24th. As Sahar continued on her phone, it would ping off cell towers, creating an invisible electronic trail of the family's movements. They went westbound along Highway 401 through Brockville and Gananoque. The family would stop for 40 minutes at the Kingston Mills Historic Lock Station at the southern tip of Rideau Canal. After piling back into the vehicles, the family continued all the way to Niagara Falls, arriving at their hotel in the early morning hours of June 25th. On the night of June 27th, Sahar's phone dialed Hamid's phone. The signal bounced off a tower 16 kilometers from the Kingston Mills locks. It's thought that Hamid or Shafia, or maybe both, had traveled back to the area to check out their chosen crime scene. Sahar would have been totally unaware that her brother's phone was all the way in Kingston at the time that she had called. On June 29th, after the family vacation was over, the Shafias checked out of the Days Inn hotel that they were staying at. Video surveillance shows Hamid paying in cash for both rooms. It would be 8 p.m. by the time the family would get on the highway, ensuring that they would be traveling so late that their unsuspecting victims would be groggy and not suspect anything was amiss. Allegedly, with the Lexus in the lead and Hamid driving, the family drove east along the Queen Elizabeth Way, Sahar sending out one message after another. When they approached Toronto, they took a scenic detour heading downtown. At 9:39 p.m. that night, Sahar took a picture of the Rogers Centre from inside the Nissan. 3 minutes later, she took a picture of the CN Tower. The vehicles traveled north onto Yonge Street and up through the city. They turned east on Highway 401. At around 10:30 p.m., they stopped at a McDonald's in Ajax. During this break, Tuba would speak with another unnamed brother, as he was concerned that Shafia would follow through on his horrific plans. At 10:54 p.m., as the vehicles continued to travel, Sahar received a phone call. She would speak with the caller for 37 minutes. This would be the last time Sahar answered her phone. With Shafia behind the wheel of the Nissan, the family drives past all the major exits for Kingston. They would exit at the city's final off-ramp at Highway 15 and headed north towards the locks. At 1:36 a.m., Sahar's phone would receive its final text message from Ricardo. As planned, the 4 unsuspecting victims were in various states of sleep when they entered the Kingston Mills parking lot. Shafia exited the Nissan and Tuba got in. She was to stay with the 4 family members while Shafia and Hamid went in search of a motel. At the Kingston East Motel, about 5 minutes from where the Nissan was parked, Shafia and Hamid would advise the manager that they needed 2 rooms, but they were confused on whether they had 6 or 9 people that would stay in the motel. They ultimately settled on 6. Hamid once again paid in cash. Shafia and Hamid left the 3 children they had with them at the hotel and made their way back to the parking lot where the Nissan sat. When Tuba saw the headlights of the Lexus, she jumped out of the Nissan and ran towards them. Although the exact location at the secluded lock station is unknown, the 4 women, Rona, Zainab, Sahar, and Geeti, were all held underwater one by one until they were no longer alive. All except Sahar had bruising on the top of their heads, suggesting that they had been hit in their final moments. Either unconscious or unalive, they were each put back into the Nissan with the front seats reclined. The plan was to make it look like it was a tragic accident while they were on a late-night ride. However, when one of them got into the Nissan to drive the car into its final stop, they had to have realized that this plan would not work. The car would have to jump over a high curb, drive across a patch of grass, make a hard left around a rock cutting, then a quick right around a narrow wall. There was no way that anyone would take a look at that route and think that this was just a freak accident. Once the vehicle was in position, the driver had left the engine running, got out, reached through the open driver's side window, and shifted the vehicle into first gear. They had assumed that the vehicle would then propel itself forward and fall over the concrete lip into the water. However, this did not happen. Only one of the front wheels cleared the concrete, resulting in the car teetering on the ledge, tires spinning, engine roaring with 4 bodies inside. Someone reached through the window and turned off the car. The only solution was to drive the Lexus behind the Nissan and ram it in the rest of the way. When the Lexus rammed into the Nissan, it would shatter the vehicle's headlight, leaving bits of plastic on the ground. Even though they had attempted to pick up all the broken pieces of the headlight, they didn't get them all. In an attempt to cover up how the Lexus got damaged, Hamid would call the cops later that morning when they were back in Montreal. He reported that there was a single car fender bender in an empty parking lot near their home. He told the responding officers that he accidentally smashed the left front end of the Lexus into a yellow utility pole. At 8:30 that morning, Hamid would call his father, who was still at the Kingston East Motel. Despite his knowledge that his sister Sahar's phone was underwater, he then called her a couple of times. Hamid had hopped into the family's green Pontiac minivan and had headed back towards Kingston. However, he was in such a rush to get home to switch vehicles and stage the fake single vehicle collision that he ended up bringing everyone's luggage as well as his mom's purse home with him to Montreal. Once Hamid returned to the Kingston Motel, they would take the other children to a nearby Tim Hortons and started the next step in their plan, the missing persons report. Just after 12 p.m. that afternoon, the 3 perpetrators walked into police headquarters. It is so crazy how these people came up with this elaborate plan. I'm also guessing that they were running off of pure adrenaline at this point. If I go to sleep too late or wake up too early, I am completely exhausted to the point where it would be difficult to function, let alone drive almost 3 hours home and then another 3 hours back to meet family. Meanwhile, investigators were already at the locks. A Parks Canada employee had notified the police about the car being in the water earlier that morning. It wasn't long before police made the connection between the Shafias and the sunken car. Police took Shafia, Tuba, and Hamid into a private room to reveal what they already knew, that their relatives were discovered in a watery grave. The trio was interviewed by police. Shafia would tell police about his business interests overseas, Zainab's pending engagement, and a $2 million shopping mall he purchased in Laval. He would tell police that they stopped in Kingston because his wife felt dizzy while driving the Nissan, and that she waited with the Nissan and the girls while Shafia and Hamid took the Lexus to look for somewhere to sleep. Police would ask Shafia where Tuba had waited while they were off looking for the motel, and how did she know where to meet them afterwards. Shafia would provide vague answers as to how his wife was able to meet him at the motel. When it was Hamid's turn to speak with police, he was asked the same question as his father. Where did Tuba wait with the Nissan? That he thought it was at McDonald's or something. He wasn't sure. When he was asked why he returned to Montreal, his story kept changing from something personal to I forgot my laptop to how he sometimes didn't feel like staying at one place with his parents. After, Hamid was told about an eyewitness who reported seeing two cars at the water's edge, but only the bigger one had driven away. The witness turned out to be an 8-year-old boy. So I'm not sure why or how an 8-year-old boy would be out at the locks in the early morning hours. Makes me wonder if this was a tactic that the police used, or did another vehicle pull into the parking lot during their vicious attack and they didn't notice. It's definitely something that I have a lot of questions about. In response, Hamid stated, quote, "You mean someone pushed them in?" The officer had never suggested this scenario and told Hamid that they thought that he knew more than what he was telling them. When it was Tuba's turn, the officer got straight to the point, asking Tuba how her car got from the motel to the water. She would tell the investigator that she pulled into Kingston but was too tired and nauseous to continue on. She parked somewhere and waited for the others to find a place to sleep. She said when they got to the hotel, they wanted to go back to get her, but she went by herself. She said it was around 2 a.m. when she was getting ready for bed when she heard Zainab ask for the keys. She said she didn't know what happened after that. She had no emotion, no tears, and told the story as if she had only lost the Nissan and not 3 of her daughters. After only 72 hours into the investigation, it was now a homicide investigation. Fast forward to July 21st, police would arrive at the Shafia residence with a search warrant and child welfare workers. For their own safety, the 3 remaining children were removed from the home and placed in protective care. Detectives spent hours inside the home. They seized phone bills, passports, a photo album with Disney characters on the front, Rona's diary, the laptop, Hamid's black suitcase, which, as mentioned before, still had pictures that Sahar had taken on her cell phone. The 3 perpetrators would be charged with first degree. On October 11, 2011, jury selection began, and the trial officially began on October 20, 2011. After 15 hours of deliberation on January 29, 2012, the jury would find Shafia, Tuba, and Hamid guilty of 4 counts of first degree. In Canada, a first-degree conviction comes with an automatic sentence of life without the possibility of parole for 25 years. This was a tragic case of 4 innocent women and children who just wanted to break free from the abuse at the hands of their family members. They just wanted to be happy. But because of a sick and twisted thought of what had to be done to honor the family and the need of their father, mother, brother, or in the case of Rona, husband, sister, wife, and son, they lost their lives. Share your thoughts on this case in the comments below. Don't forget to follow, like, and share this episode. It helps people discover these stories and keeps the conversation going. Thanks for listening to Crime Time 911. Stay safe, stay curious, and remember to always trust your gut.